Welcome, Focus Learners, to this explainer of Lesson 14 from the classic curriculum, 504 Absolutely Essential Words. Today, we're going to take something that is usually a massive chore, rote memorization, just staring at a list until your eyes cross, and transform it into actual contextual mastery. If you've ever struggled to make new vocabulary stick in your brain for more than, say, 24 hours, you are in exactly the right place. We're going to break down these words, group them together logically, and then watch them play out in action. Sound good? Let's dive into this.
Here's a quick look at our agenda for today. We'll kick things off with a welcome to Lesson 14, then tackle our first group, words of chaos and conflict. After that, we'll hit actions, status, and confusion, before moving on to story time with a little roller derby action. Finally, we'll wrap up by looking at the true power of context. All right, Section 1, welcome to Lesson 14, and the challenge of rote memorization. So here is the absolute million-dollar question. How on earth do you memorize 12 complex words in just a few minutes? And honestly, more importantly, how do you actually remember them tomorrow or next week? Look, if you're just staring at a blank list, repeating definitions over and over, you are fighting a totally uphill battle. It's just inefficient. Our brains don't really like isolated facts, right? They crave connections. They love stories. So instead of brute forcing it, we're going to see how this source material deliberately builds this amazing web of meaning to anchor these words deep down into your long-term memory. Okay, take a deep breath. Here are the 12 essential words from Lesson 14. We've got unruly, rival, violent, brutal, opponent, brawl, duplicate, vicious, whirling, underdog, thrust, and bewildered. I know. It looks completely overwhelming at first glance. It's just a giant wall of text. But don't sweat it. We absolutely aren't going to tackle them all at once. Let's start chunking this down into something a whole lot more manageable. Moving right along to Section 2, words of chaos and conflict. Grouping from mental associations. We can make this list so much easier to digest by chunking together our first theme, which is all about conflict and chaos. We're going to start with unruly. Now, the text defines this as hard to rule or control, lawless. Think about a situation where the rules are just being completely ignored. The source material paints a great picture of this, noting that unruly behavior is strictly prohibited at the swimming pool. Or picture a worker who gets fired because he just persisted in acting in an unruly way. It's that wild, uncontrollable energy. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Let's look at the contrast between two concepts that are super similar, and honestly, we mix them up all the time: rival and opponent. So a rival is someone who wants and tries to get the exact same thing as you do. You're competing for the same overarching goal, kind of like two competing pizza shops in the same small town. An opponent, on the other hand, is someone who's actively on the other side of a specific fight, game, or debate. You face an opponent in a Friday night chess match, but you might have a lifelong rival in your career. Make sense? And, what happens when those rivals or opponents clash a bit too hard? Things escalate quickly into our next word, a brawl. The book defines a brawl simply, but perfectly, as a noisy quarrel or fight. Picture a journalist trying to cover the messy details of a massive brawl in the park, or maybe a super polite discussion that just suddenly flips into a violent brawl. It's loud, it's chaotic, and it hits the nail on the head for our chaos theme. Which brings us to a word that brilliantly illustrates the harshness of conflict: brutal. It means cruel and savage. Just check out this intense example straight from the sample sentences in our source. The brutal track coach persisted in making the team work out all morning under the hot sun. Ouch! You can literally feel the sunburn and the exhaustion just reading that, right? That visceral emotional response is exactly what helps lock the word brutal into your brain. Rounding out our chaos theme, we have two very heavy hitters, violent and vicious. Now, while they're definitely cousins, pay attention to the nuance here. Violent is really about the physical action itself, acting or being done with strong, rough force. Vicious, however, that speaks more to the underlying intent. It's evil, it's wicked, it's savage. For example, someone might have a violent, knee-jerk reaction when they get startled. But a vicious gossip columnist, they're publishing false stories with pure malicious intent. Let's shift gears a bit. Section 3, actions, status, and confusion, moving beyond the fight. So we're stepping away from the direct conflict now to look at the actions, the physical states, and the confusing statuses that tend to pop up during a struggle. First up, consider the underdog. The text defines this as the person having the worst of any struggle, the one who is fully expected to lose. And honestly, it's such a fantastic, evocative word. Whether you're talking about a sports team pulling off a miracle win or just feeling empathy for the underdog in a street fight, it immediately paints a vivid picture of someone facing just incredible odds.
Okay, I love this next one. This fantastic cartoon, pulled directly from the text, completely anchors our next word, bewildered. It means completely confused or puzzled. Just look at the guy in the image. He's scratching his head, staring at this ridiculous pole that's simultaneously telling him walk, don't walk, and one way. You can feel his brain short-circuiting. By associating bewildered with this specific, kind of goofy visual of contradictory signs, your brain is going to lock in that definition with zero effort.
Finally, to finish out our dozen for Lesson 14, we have 3 distinct action words. We've got duplicate, meaning to make an exact copy, like duplicating a study guide so your whole study group has one. Then there's whirling, which is turning or swinging round and round, kind of like a space capsule whirling around the Earth before re-entry. And lastly, thrust, meaning to push with force. Think of how a massive jet engine thrusts a rocket straight up from the launch pad. These are the action words that are going to give our vocabulary list some real momentum.
All right, here we go. Section 4. Story time, roller derby, putting the words into action.
Let's get to the narrative climax. This is the absolute best part, where the source material brings all 12 of those complex words from Lesson 14 together into one single high-speed context. The setting they chose for this ultimate vocabulary test? The incredibly fast-paced, highly competitive, and famously aggressive sport of roller derby. Keep your ears wide open as we see how beautifully these words weave together. Notice how seamlessly these words just set the chaotic stage right out of the gate in the opening sentences. The most unruly game known to man or woman is the roller derby. It has no rival for violent, brutal action. Boom. In just 2 sentences, we've taken unruly, rival, violent, and brutal and planted them into a context that makes total, vivid sense. You can practically hear the skates hitting the floor.
And then the narrative really hits the gas. When the skater leaves the pack, the brawl begins. No sport can duplicate the vicious shrieking, whirling around the track. As the race intensifies, that physical fight, the brawl kicks off. The text is telling us that absolutely nothing else can duplicate or copy it, as these skaters are whirling around with vicious, totally savage shrieking. See what's happening? You aren't just reading a list of words anymore. You are inside the scene.
And here is the thrilling, slightly terrifying conclusion of the paragraph. Often considered the underdog, the female skater can thrust a pointed fingernail into the face of a bewildered enemy. Wow. So the person expected to lose, our underdog, fights back, pushing with force or thrusting at a completely confused, bewildered opponent. Just like that, every single word from Lesson 14 was utilized in one cohesive, completely unforgettable little story. Which brings us nicely to Section 5, the power of context, the learning process.
Look, by just reading and visualizing that one roller derby paragraph, you've just proven to yourself that you can seamlessly process all 12 of these complex words when they're presented together. This perfectly highlights the brilliant 3-step learning mechanism of this whole curriculum. First, you get a solid grip on the precise definition. Second, you anchor it in reality using distinct sample sentences. And third, the real magic, you solidify it forever in a short, engaging narrative. It is a literal game changer for moving vocabulary out of short-term cramming and into long-term comprehension.
So, as we wrap up this explainer on Lesson 14, I want to leave you with one final thought and a bit of a challenge to truly lock in your learning today. Knowledge isn't just about passive understanding, right? It's about active application. So, which of these newly mastered words, whether it's bewildered, vicious, underdog, or unruly, will you confidently thrust into your own daily conversation? Pick one right now, just one, and make it yours today. Thanks so much for hanging out with me, and keep learning.